The United States is the wealthiest, most powerful superpower in the history of the world. It's a country that went from a handful of starving settlers in a swamp to putting a man on the moon in just 362 years. But the story of America isn't just a straight line of progress. It's a story of a massive, messy experiment. A nation founded on the idea that all men are created equal, while at the same time, millions were held in chains. It's a story of genius inventions, brutal wars, and a constant struggle to figure out what freedom actually means. So, how did a group of ragtag colonies take down the world's greatest empire and end up running the planet? To understand that, we have to go back to a time when North America was a blank spot on a European map. Before the first Europeans showed up, North America was home to millions of people in hundreds of sophisticated tribes, from the Iroquois in the north to the Mississippian mound builders. But in 1492, Christopher Columbus bumped into the Caribbean while looking for a western route to Asia, and the world changed overnight. Spain and France rushed in to grab land, but for England, the start was a complete disaster. Their first attempt at Roanoke literally vanished, leaving nothing but a word carved into a tree. Then came 1607. A group of English investors sent 3 ships to Virginia to find gold. They found a swamp instead. This was Jamestown. Within a few short years, during the brutal winter of 1609, settlers were eating their boots just to stay alive. Tobacco eventually saved Virginia, but it also created a demand for labor that led to the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in 1619, a moment that would haunt American history forever. Meanwhile, up in Massachusetts, the Pilgrims arrived in 1620. They weren't looking for gold, they were looking for a place to pray, without the King of England breathing down their necks. By the mid-1700s, there were 13 distinct colonies. They were wealthy, they were growing, and they were starting to feel less like British subjects and more like something else. The trouble started with a bill. Britain had just fought a massive war against France, the 7 Years' War, to protect the colonies, and they needed the Americans to pay their share of the taxes. Tensions boiled over when Britain taxed tea and stamps without giving the colonies representation in Parliament. In 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd in Boston. In 1773, the colonists dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. By 1775, shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. In July 1776, Thomas Jefferson sat down and wrote the Declaration of Independence. It was a breakup letter to King George III, and it was treason. The Americans were led by George Washington, a man who lost more battles than he won, but he was a master of not giving up. With a huge assist from the French, the Americans trapped the British at Yorktown in 1781. The British surrendered, and the United States was born. Winning the war was the easy part. Now they had to run a country. In 1787, they wrote the Constitution, creating a government with 3 branches, so no one person could become a king. Then, in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson got the deal of a lifetime. Napoleon was broke and offered to sell the entire Louisiana Territory, 828,000 square miles, for just $15 million. Overnight, the U.S. doubled in size. Americans began moving west in droves. They called it Manifest Destiny, the idea that the nation was destined to own everything from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But this expansion came at a horrific cost to Native Americans. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson forced thousands of Cherokee and other tribes off their land in the Trail of Tears, where thousands died. The map was growing, but the soul of the country was fracturing. By the 1850s, the U.S. was a house divided. The North was industrial, with factories and railroads, and most people wanted to stop the spread of slavery. The South was an agricultural empire built entirely on the backs of enslaved people. When Lincoln was elected in 1860, the South seceded, believing their way of life was under threat. The Civil War was the bloodiest conflict in American history. More Americans died here than in World War I and II combined. It was brother against brother. At the Battle of Gettysburg, over 50,000 men fell in 3 days. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, turning the war into a crusade for human freedom. In 1865, the North won. The slavery was abolished and the Union was saved. But Lincoln was assassinated just days after the surrender. After the war, America went into overdrive. This was the Gilded Age. The North and West exploded with the rise of industrial titans like John D. Rockefeller in oil and Andrew Carnegie in steel. They built the railroads that connected the coasts and the factories that made America the wealthiest nation on Earth. In 1903, 2 brothers in North Carolina flew the first airplane. In 1908, Henry Ford put the world on wheels with the Model T. America was becoming a global player. When World War I broke out in Europe, America initially stayed out, but German submarine warfare eventually drew them in. The arrival of 2 million American troops tipped the scales, ending the war in 1918. The 1920s followed as a decade of jazz, radio, and rising stock prices. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, and the Roaring Twenties turned into the Great Depression. 1 out of every 4 Americans was out of work. President Franklin D. Roosevelt took over, promising a New Deal, but it was the outbreak of World War II that truly pulled America out of the crisis. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, forcing America into total war mode. While soldiers fought in the Pacific and on the beaches of Normandy, American factories became the arsenal of democracy. In 1945, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, ending the war. America emerged as the world's dominant superpower, with the only intact industrial economy and the world's most powerful weapon. The U.S. immediately entered a Cold War with the Soviet Union, a struggle between democracy and communism that lasted 40 years. At home, the 1950s saw the rise of the civil rights movement. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus, and Martin Luther King Jr. led a nonviolent revolution to end segregation. Through protests and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, America began to face its oldest demons. However, the Cold War led to a stalemate in Vietnam, a jungle war that America couldn't win, and which turned the public against the government. In 1974, the country was further shaken when President Richard Nixon resigned following the Watergate scandal. The 1980s saw a military and economic comeback under Ronald Reagan. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving America as the last superpower standing. The 1990s were defined by the internet and a booming economy. But the new millennium brought the September 11th attacks, pulling the U.S. into the War on Terror and long conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. In 2008, America elected its first black president, Barack Obama, during a major financial crisis. The 2010s saw the rise of social media, deep political divisions, and the presidency of Donald Trump, which challenged many long-standing norms. Today, the United States is a country of 349 million people, grappling with high inequality and intense political debate. The story of America is one of people believing they can reinvent themselves. A collection of immigrants from every corner of the globe trying to live under one flag. It has failed many times. But it has also achieved things no other nation has. From a starving outpost in Jamestown to the most influential culture on Earth. The American experiment continues.